When you're ready. Ooh, it sounds like
Yeah.
you're ready. And do we have to say okay? I said okay. All right.
Okay.
Um, well, welcome. I am glad that you all could join us today. I'm Blair Miller, and I'm a member of NICP Outreach. And as a committee, we seek to broaden the understanding of our collective past and the important work of telling and preserving all stories that paint a more complete picture of our American history, our collective history. And this fireside chat and the series is brought to you by NICP Outreach. This session is being recorded and will be placed ultimately on the NICP YouTube channel, and we'll send out a notification when that happens. We've also got a recording of our first fireside chat that we held last month. By way of introduction, I'm a longtime member of the Colorado Preservation community, having served as a board president of our statewide nonprofit, Colorado Preservation. And I also had the very good luck and privilege of working alongside Dana Crawford, an exemplary preservationist and developer, and the namesake of the preservation program at the College of Architecture and Planning here at UC Denver, where I'm also an instructor. I'm very sorry that Sarah Marsom could not join us today, but I'm excited to begin our conversation with our special guest, Sheila Moto Casper. And rather than read to you her bio, I would like to sort of tease out that information through our questions and conversation. So we'll learn Sheila's story in her own words. And with that, welcome, Selah, and let's begin the conversation with where your professional path began. What was your first internship, and what drew you to apply, and what did you take away from that experience?
Uh, Well, hello, welcome everyone, and thank you for your time and Nick P for just the invitation. I'm so excited to talk about historic preservation as a career, excited to share my own experience and collaborate with you all once again in a different form. So I would love to share, I put together some slides so I can share my story with you a little bit. Let me pull this up. Great. So I will get to who I am just a little bit. So we're going to pass through some of these. But before I get started on my own path, I want to share where I'm from. So I am originally from North Texas in a small town called Grapevine, Texas. It's if you've ever flown into the DFW airport, that was my backyard. And this is my historic Main Street that I grew up in. And our Main Street was built from the late 1820s with a lot of oath cotton and then also so I just like to share this to like share that this is my first entree to I was being introduced to historic go to the little drugstore right there, go get an ice cream. Me and my cousins, we would ride our bicycles up and down Main Street and just enjoy all of the adaptive reuse that we saw come out of these buildings. And this is my first introduction to a museum or just anything to do with cultural heritage. This was our little Grapevine Museum. It was located on a city park, and we would go there for our big school outings. We'd walk there. It's only about 3 blocks away. And the story here tells about the evolution of Grapevine through the lens of a very Anglo and colonized history. But it definitely helped shape the person that I am today. And then this is my Grapevine Main Street. Today, Grapevine is known as being one of the first 4 Main Street programs in the nation that ever launched. It's also one of the most successful ones. And I am not sure why, but Main Street, my Main Street, is now known for having a very large Grape Fest. So if you're here in Texas, then you know that it's the largest wine festival in Texas. But we're also called the Christmas capital of the nation. And I'm not sure how we got that name. I think it was self-designated, but I think it's also very interesting to see how identities evolve over time, even just through my own life cycle of being a Main Street. And now, whenever I bring up that I'm from Grapevine, everyone either knows us for Grape Fest or for Christmas shopping.
Hmm.
So with that, I will share, a little bit about my own experience. I went to Savannah College of Art and Design. And when I was first looking for schools, this was in about 2010, 2011, and my undergrad was in art history. I wanted to work in museums, and I focused on Latina artists, and just a lot of the early workings of trying to find these unknown, untold, overlooked, lost, or erased histories. I went to a school, a historic women's school in North Texas, and through even my art history book at Texas Women's University, which was like this thick, a huge encyclopedic art history book, there were only three women inside of it, not one woman of color. So as I was doing my research and thinking about what did I want to do next, I knew that I wanted to work with a lot of undertold stories and continue to carry that through. So I started to look up things that had more community building in them. And that's what led me to historic preservation. And I'm sure if you're studying historic preservation, you had that moment that I did, which is like, what in the world is historic preservation? Because we've never heard of it. Even if you grew up on one of the first main streets ever, you've never heard of the term historic preservation. And so I went to Savannah College of Art and Design. I was looking for my first fellowship. I was in Georgia and wanted to come back home to Texas to do some research. And I was able to get one of the very first diversity scholarships through the State Historic Preservation Office. Our SHPO is called the Texas Historical Commission. This building here is called the Pink Building. And it's where a lot of the community development groups out of the SHPO were working. And in the summer of 2013, I was selected to begin doing research for the very first ever Hispanic or Tejano heritage tourism guidebook that the state had ever taken on. So myself and my colleague Joel, we took to it. We started doing research, started doing site identification, and every day I just felt like such a big boss parking in downtown Austin at this really, really gorgeous downtown parking lot. If you can even say a parking lot is gorgeous, but that's how just rose-colored glasses I had on and was able to walk to the Pink House every single day. So this was my first fellowship. It also was a huge inspiration in the work that I started to do because it's exactly in this building that I realized that all of the sites that I wanted to share or the histories that I wanted to write about, research, do site identification on to put in this guidebook, they were not known to SHPO staff, to the historians or preservationists. Like folks didn't know what the League of United Latin American Citizens were. And if you grew up in Texas, you know what LULAC is. So that was one of the first times that I ever realized that not everyone knew who LULAC was. If you're not sure, if you didn't grow up in a borderland state, then you may not know that LULAC is the very first ever Latino civil rights group that was founded out of Corpus Christi, out of the teens. It began a lot with Mexican lynchings. It's very centered on racial and social justice issues, education issues, and it's one of the first social racial groups that ever organized in the United States formally. So through this Tejano guidebook, I realized that my histories were not being seen or represented. And then worse, that even if I was able to find someone or a place where a site was once located, this is the location that I got the heartbreaking realization that Latinx historical sites weren't preserved and they weren't part of the mainstream narrative. And it was so cyclical. And what I was facing up against would be something that I continue to face up against every day, but it's the very thing that we fight for at LHC. So that was my first fellowship. Um, oh, you're on mute, Blair.
unmuting me. Hi. Thank you for that. And I'm wondering how long had Savannah College of Art and Design is a pretty special place. And in kind of the preservation world, I think she the gal who started that, I know she was recognized by the National Trust.
Mhm.
Um, but how long had that school been in existence when you were a student there?
The preservation program was very fresh and very new. It
Yeah.
was only about 3 years old at that
Okay.
point in time. Paula Wallace started Savannah College of Art and Design, and in the late 70s as an art school. If you've ever been to Savannah, all of the great art installations, all of the talented individuals that you see, international students just coming in to study art. And when I was first looking at schools, there were barely any programs in historic preservation. At that time, I applied to Columbia and to Cornell that had an HP certificate in art conservation and SCAD.
Okay.
Penn wasn't really like they were just starting to get together at that point in time. And so I was accepted to Columbia and to SCAD. And I was like, I'm going to study in one of the most historic cities in the nation. And added bonus, they have cemetery conservation classes there,
Mhm.
which is also very rare. And if you know me, you know that I love a good cemetery conservation project. So that just sealed the deal, Savannah and cemeteries.
Right? Um, well, and I wonder this next question where we want to hear about your current role and a little bit more about what you're doing at Latinos and Heritage Conservation, but also about the formation of that organization. Because I wonder if there isn't some of the fact that you were influenced by being at SCAD when that program was still kind of new and starting out, because I think your role, from my perspective, your role at LHC has been very much, the organization had been around, but like you're really helping kind of birth it. And I wonder if that plays into each other a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me slip on here. So this is LHC. We are the only nonprofit that solely focuses on the historic preservation of Latinx heritage. We are very much a non-traditional historic preservation org, and that's because while I studied within our preservation system, exactly what you just said, Blair. There's so many things that were not provided to me in my own education that I had to seek out. And it's something that myself and a lot of the people that are in this image here, like you can see the one with the glasses right in the center, that's Desiree Aranda. She is one of our fearless founders and conceptualized LHC. We were mirrored after Asian Pacific American Islanders and Historic Preservation. They had just organized the year before. And we were finding the same things that we were all so siloed, doing this work siloed. We had one individual that was working for the LA Conservancy, starting to do a Latino context study. I was doing the first research on Latinx historic preservation. Eddie, the gentleman in the back with his glasses on, he's an architect and doing historic preservation, architecture, and we all had these similar stories where we're going to conferences or working in the West Side in San Antonio, or doing this work, and we're just very siloed and didn't have a network. So we really started out with just trying to create a connection and network because we also didn't have, if you don't have a network, then you don't have a support system or a support group. And when you are like, at least at my school, like going to school with like the top 1% of those students, and they're all, white, and their parents are paying for their school. My school experience was very different than theirs. And, I didn't have that cohort to be able to have my own support system. So we all became a support system to one another, and we were an organic group. We would have phone calls, like back in the day, phone calls with about 20 of us once a month, and we would just commiserate or share findings, share case studies, help brainstorm, think through something, an issue at work. Like a lot of times it was navigating political systems at work. And a lot of our founders also were academics, academia folks, curators. So also thinking through broader issues and larger systems and institutions. So that's how we started. And I'm really excited to share that We celebrated our 10-year anniversary this past year. So we are now 11 years old almost. And, I always think of us like we're preteens and like this like little world and being disruptors. And it's so much fun. And we've evolved so much, as you've said. We've started organizing in 2013, but really in 2014. And then we received nonprofit status in 2020, and that allowed us to get funding, Blair. And as you were saying, I came on board. I went over from a founding member to being executive director. We had gotten funding from the Mellon Foundation. It was the largest funding to date. In that round, we received $750,000, and it allowed us to hire staff. So all of these great, wonderful projects that we had been working and developing in the back. This was our passion project. All of LHC, we would all gift like 25 hours a week to LHC just to do things like get the Abuelas project started, the Latinx Preservation Toolkit started. We had convenings every other year. We'd have webinars. We would do letters of support, and a lot of advocacy was our early work as well. And then we were able to go from that to a formal organization. So that year, in 2022, I became ED and hired talented staff of 3. And now there's a total of 10 of us, which is incredible. And I can't wait to share some of the work that we're doing later once we get through this a really great conversation about just career and pathways for preservation. But my earlier work really was inspired, and I'd even say my childhood really inspired the work that I did. I'm a first generation Latina and grew up in Texas, where the Texas history books are very like glorified Texan, this like very Alamo shaped narrative. And being Mexican, I had learned another story about Santa Ana, and it was the very first times that I started to question the history that was being fed to me, the narratives that I was learning about. I was also always seeking out history books at the library. Like I would check out the Amelia Earhart little black and white bio book that was like 10 pages, and Dr. Martin Luther King. I read those like every week, check those out. And so I think there was always just a hunger for learning history and understanding history better. And then through that and through my high school and undergraduate, and then growing up in a border state as well was very formative. But I'll tell you, one of the biggest things that really just jumped all of this, even though I can see the pieces always coming together, in my life is when I was taken out of a border state. So being taken out of Texas, where I spoke Spanish every single day, where I have yummy Mexican food every single day, where I see my heritage reflected every single day, to going to Georgia, where at that point in time, there was like I don't know, hardly any Latinos in Savannah. And if they were fellow students, and there was definitely none in my program. Yeah, it was very formative to be there and to be in a historical setting that wasn't telling the narrative of enslavement. And that was something I was very passionate about when I was there, and would do a lot of research and writing about and site identification on. And so it was jarring to me not being in my own borderland state and having access to my own heritage, even though I grew up in North Texas. And sometimes I realized that even that was very isolated, and that's within that own space. But being out of my comfort zone and being out of, where I was born and raised definitely made me have that existential crisis that made me realize that, oh my goodness, if we're not taking care of this history, if we're not stewarding this, if we're not telling these stories, I'm not learning it in historic preservation. I didn't learn it as a historian. I didn't learn it in school. And so that crisis led up to the Pink House, which led up to my thesis and led up to a lot of the work that we're continuing today at LHC.
Awesome. Well, and that helped that because it does seem to me we were talking about how much LHC has gotten done in and I equate it to your time there, which is brief, but it's because of all the legwork and because of all the time that you all had put in as of just a volunteer group. I think that that helped you just launch as sort of swiftly as you have into the really powerful work you've been doing. So you all, Latinos in Heritage Conservation, host fellowships. And can you explain to us how you've chosen to define a fellowship versus an internship?
We So we do have a fellowship program. We call it the Semilla Scholars Program, and semillas are seeds in Spanish. And we often talk about seeds at LHC. We talk about semillas sembradas, like the planting of a seed. There is a very famous Mexican proverb that says they tried to bury us, but they did not know that we were seeds. And it's something that we take to heart, that we realize in all of the work that we do, whether it's through community outreach, whether it's through educational programming, whether it's through some of the projects that we have going on right now. These are all semillas that we're planting because we are birthing a new movement. We're birthing and shifting historic preservation into ways that we haven't done so in the United States. So Semilla Scholars, we have them, and we purposefully chose to call it a fellowship because we don't see it necessarily as being a very task-oriented way to be able to invest in prospective students. It's a way that we can really invest in their professional development. And that's the way that we look at it, is that many of us that come from brown or Black backgrounds don't have opportunities like this. We don't have opportunities where people are really investing in us. And so we very much invest in our fellows from beginning to end, even through the application process all the way through the end. But we really focus on their own cultivation professionally within the spaces of historic preservation. We talk about navigating within the very white space of historic preservation. We create networks between them, and not only are they are talented and amazing, wonderful scholars, which every year we say this, and every year it gets harder and harder. But every year they're just smarter and smarter and so talented, and it's so hard. If we had all the funding, we would hire everybody, but we usually have, depending on that cohort, anywhere from 3 to about 5 scholars for that project. And it's meant to be intimate because we interact with them every single day. We work virtually, but we're a very close and tight-knit group. Even when our fellows come on board, they work hand in hand with staff from day one. So the fellowship part is part of our mission. As I said, part of our mission is educational development. It's part of the solution that we see to be about historic preservation and shifting the tides, is investing in our own community to make sure that not only are we being able to cultivate the next gen of historic preservationists, but that these are the scholars that then will go into academia, into historic preservations. These will be the ones writing the narratives or writing chapters in the books that we read within historic preservation. These are the folks that will be doing keynotes at national preservation conferences and such. So we very much care about them, and we to date stay up to date with them and celebrate their successes. And many have even been hired at LHC, which is incredible. Garina was on the call earlier, but she was one who was a GIS fellow for the Abuelas project, and she's now our data manager overseeing our Abuelas project. So
Awesome. To
yeah.
create that pipeline is just so amazing. And as you tell us about some of the ideas you guys have around creating your fellowships and things, what do you have suggestions for others, for other universities and organizations, how to shape the professional development opportunities for emerging professionals? Do you have like some logistics perspectives you could share around, I know you got funding sources or management, tricks or things like that?
Absolutely. I think the first thing, especially I know a lot of Nick P's audience, they our, academics. And I think the biggest thing is to encourage and to support your Black and Brown students that are going through your programs, also women that are going through your programs, because that direct support and that nurturing typically is not there.
Mhm.
Going to SCAD, I went to a very competitive school, like very competitive. And I think that's just graduate school, but when you're when you're in these systems and taken out of your backyard or your comfort zone, it can be like very jarring. And I went to school later on, and I was older, married, and it was still very jarring. And I think about that, and that's part of also the experience that we talk about at LHC is that recognizing that our graduate students typically are going to get their master's or PhD candidates, that they are having that same experience. So I think that connection and care is very important. That stewarding of that next generation is very important. The other thing that I would share too is the sharing of opportunities. It seems like, and I sit on a lot of boards, and a lot of national preservation boards, or a lot of things like that. And usually I'm the only one, like these schools haven't heard about certain preservation scholars programs. Like I sit on our SHPO, Friends of the Texas Historical Commission. We bring in scholars every single year, usually about 20, and they get to work on really cool projects like the one that I shared with you about. And a lot of the preservation, like professors that I'm reaching out to that are in my network, or history professors, will send it their way here in Texas, and they not ever heard of these programs. So I also think it's educating yourself about opportunities for your students, and keeping that networking going, because that's so, I mean, we all know as professionals that networking is so, so important for us to connect to folks. And then also with fellowships, I think one of the barriers is the barriers of applications. Um, we know that applications are very daunting, but a fellowship application should not be as daunting as like a graduate school application. I sit on so many fellowship panels, and I look at this application, and it is like 10 pages, without answers in them. It's like a
Mhm.
10-page narrative, and it's just crazy. So I really think that that is even an inequality in the system, because if you're a graduate student and working like I was, you don't have time to do things like that. And so it just further creates further inequality within systems. So for us, these are lessons learned, and we've all taken our own lessons learned and have really taken that to heart. So our fellowship applications are very simple. Applicants get all of the questions up front before they interview with us. And then for the second interview, same. And if there has to be a third interview, same, but we try not to do a third interview because, again, we know how daunting it can be. But there's been twice now that we've had to have that because we were just split. And so there's that. And then also, for the interview process, because we know how daunting that can be, we recognize when somebody is feeling some kind of way, and maybe they're nervous, or you can hear their voice quivering. We'll just stop and take a breather,
Mhm.
and just take a step away, lighten up the mood a little bit, maybe tell a little joke. We'll stop the interview process, and then we'll get back to it. So that way we know that that scholar, that fellow has the best scenario and the best experience interviewing as they can, because we also recognize that that's part of their own professional development as well. So we take it very seriously, and there's a lot that I can say. The biggest thing that I will say is that we have to make sure that our scholars are paid, that these are paid fellowships, and that it's a fair wage. Especially if we're talking about Black and Brown communities. We pay on average anywhere from $30 to $35 an hour. Our fellowships are about 15 hours a week. And so we keep it that way. So there's a balance between if they have a family, if they have work commitments, if they're currently in school, but they're able to balance all of that out. We also provide them with many other perks, one being we have a National Preservation Conference every other year, and the scholars that are part of our Semilla Scholars program, if they apply for a Congreso scholarship, because we're investing in their further in their professional development, those are very high priority candidates for us because we want then to connect them with the professional circles that we have in person. And it's beautiful because we had our last conference was in San Diego, and one of our scholars was there. She was an Abuela scholar, and there she was able to get connected with Green Latinos and then took on a year fellowship with them.
Yeah.
Got hired on the spot. And so a lot of people also come to our conferences to do hiring or recruiting for schools because there's just so many talented individuals.
That's so great.
Yeah.
Again, with the pipeline, and just keeping it all kind of within a group because we're a small community. We're not a big, really, not even nationally. That's great that you do that and that you treat with such humanity during an interview process to give them time to collect themselves if they need to. Because are these all graduate level students or do you have some undergrad students that are
We have
fellows?
some undergrad.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a young person.
Very young. And if they're competing with somebody that is in their PhD, they're in their candidacy. One time we had a 20-year-old and she just incredible, bright individual. And we often even think about that, are we being equitable? And so
Mm.
we do a lot of things just to double check ourselves along the way.
Awesome. Um, So, emerging professional opportunities are not just about what the institution can get from the laborers or the fellows, but what the fellows can get from the institutions. What preservation skill development opportunities do you see a growing need for? And what do our emerging professionals need to learn how to do both to support community needs and to help an applicant stand out in a big stack of competitors?
I think that's a great question. It's part of what we think about every single day at LHC. We have a lot of talent that they're coming right out of school, and that is also purposeful, where we have hired folks or that haven't even graduated with their degree yet, and we still hire them for a position that we know that they can currently do, but we know that once we invest in them in a year or two, that they are going to be far beyond anything that we could have ever imagined and daydreamt of. And so we do a lot of that too, where it's a lot of internal training and cultivation with current staff. And being and recognizing again that if we want to be equitable and try to shift historic preservation, that there are a lot of systems that we as an organization can commit to. So that's part of the preservation skill development opportunities that you were talking about. Oftentimes if I have somebody like our last fellow, she was our equity fellow, and she went and studied in the UK. Amazing individual, super smart, but she was having a really hard time getting a job in the United States because she didn't study in the US. And of course, if you don't study in the US, how do you know the laws? How do you know all of the technicalities, the NHPA? How do you know these things? And so she would interview and was not, and she interviewed with us 3 times. And I was like, I love you so much. I want to help you. So we brought her on, and she was our equity fellow, and basically gave her my Preservation 101 book and said, read this, read my thesis, and let's get to work. And so after that, like, it was so great because we would chat every single day. And, she's like talking about this NPS bulletin, that NPS bulletin, about this act, that act. And it was just so lovely to see the evolution of her knowledge of US preservation and knowing that we were able to give her that type of skill development when no one else would, I know is going to help her get a job here in the United States. And she's actively applying now. So I'm very excited to see what comes of her future. The other thing that I think that needs to be talked about is like the supporting of needs. Oftentimes, a student may not have like I was saying, the financial resources to
Mhm.
do certain things. And a lot of the fellowships that I sit on, they say things like must have this, must have that, must have this, and usually it's around technology, and that can be very hard. Even we work with a lot of students on the borderlands, even having access to high speed internet that can be an issue. So high-speed internet was something we had to consider if we have somebody that literally is right on the borderland, and internet can be very spotty. So I think that there's a lot that's back and forth in this like cultivation and relationship. Like the fellows just really inspire me so much. We get so excited by their passion. Like I sometimes get very jealous of graduate school me because I remember all of like the philosophical and theological conversations about things like windows or things that we talk about that were so important at the time, and now it's just like, oh, but I love having those types of conversations, and they just bring so much passion and um positivity into our work. So it's definitely reciprocal. It's hard every time when they leave us because we come so close to them. And, there's lots of feelings around that. But yeah, if we're lucky enough, then we see them come back, and a lot of them are already, getting jobs, and now we're working alongside of them. One of our fellows is working for the United Farm Workers, and we just submitted a joint grant application to do a teacher preservation workshop in California. So, yeah, it's just really neat seeing the way that our communities are evolving together and how our work continues to evolve together.
That's fantastic. So those are the questions in full disclosure that Sarah Marsom crafted to ask Selah. So I obviously would give a shout out to Sarah. And you talked about providing opportunities and letting students know about different opportunities. She, for our students, puts out a monthly blast of everything that's happening nationwide and in Colorado, and internship and fellowship and job opportunities. And it's so great to have somebody just devoted to that exercise because it's such an important piece of the puzzle. If we can open it up if anybody has questions. For Selah, you could put them in the chat. I think we're a small enough group. If anybody wanted to ask a question, it'd be fine. And
Or even pop on camera. We'd welcome that
yeah,
too.
it's if we can un camera you, but if not, if you're going to be shy, I have some bonus questions. Because you did already talk about fellowship wages, which it's amazing that you guys pay 30 to 35 an hour. I'm embarrassed to say what for our scholars that we have through a grant we have here, what we're paying is not that much. But you guys are a national organization, and the opportunities are currently kind of hybrid for what you offer. How have you guys worked to foster living wages regardless of where the worker lives? Because indeed, those are living wages.
Absolutely. It's something that we thought about a lot. And during when I was going in school, this was when a lot of the work around free fellowships within historic preservation, a lot of that conversation was being had in 2012 to 2014, if y'all remember, and just thinking about being equitable. And we had a lot of preservation groups, like local nonprofit partners that were doing free internships, like there in Savannah. A lot of architectural firms in Texas and in Georgia, same free, it was like they were hiring them for free. And there was a lot of questions around that. And we weren't using the topic pay equity then, but that's exactly what we were talking about was pay. Like, how equitable is it? Because there again, you're creating some type of inequitable system, because if I'm a student that has to work, how can I sustain myself through graduate school and also take up a non-paying fellowship? So just through our own experience and our early board founders, everybody had very similar experiences, and we decided that we were not going to do that. Even before we ever had funding, we all pitched in and gave like $200, $300 so we could pay a fellow to do like a beginning and end project fairly. And thankfully, we have a lot of board members that could give a lot and help that, but that's how deeply we believed in it. And so whenever we decided to do this, we wanted it to be a very attractive fellowship for fellows to consider because we knew that we are a smaller organization. Maybe we're not like so flashy or sexy like the NPS at that time, or like maybe a SHPO. And so we wanted to provide a financial system that would be rewarding and beneficial to the scholar, but also one that would help lead this kind of conversation that we need to be paying brown and black students higher dollars because we need to invest in them and help support them in their academic career, and hopefully come out of this fellowship with a little added bonus in their pockets instead of having to always like wonder how you're going to pay for your lunch the next day. So that is something that we really began to think about through that, and then also thinking through the way that and I'll touch on even just work too, because we carry that through within our own work. We've been able to keep this up as well. LHC, we pay for 100% of each employee's medical benefits, and that's unheard of. We're a very small organization, but again, we recognize that Latinxes in the United States are very overlooked in when it comes to the medical system, and that we don't take care of ourselves because we're out there hustling every single day. So we wanted to create a space for staff that also nurtured self-preservation as well. So, I know it's there's a lot of fundraising that goes into it, especially if you're going to pay a fellow $30 to $35 or pay, for somebody's benefits 100%. That's a lot of fundraising to do, but it's a commitment that I have made and my board has made to the type of organization that we want to be, and the type of like ethical organization that we want to be. And we also just very much recognize that also in historic preservation, we've all worked at various places that benefits are also very hard to come by if you work in the preservation field. So as a movement, that's also something that we talk openly about because we think that, we are very overlooked on how hard we work. We work across, it's truly altruistic, like the work that we do. And folks that work at certified local governments, hardest job ever. I have worked with a city like for 2 years. That's just wild, the work that they do. I worked for the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Same. I was working 3 jobs, and same here. But but at least it's like there's so many benefits that we can give to these systems, and including giving like days for rest. We give like very, very, very healthy vacation days for staff because we want to recharge, and we don't want burnout. So I'll just stop there. See if that answered your question.
It did, and that's awesome. And what it brought up for me is how kind of fortuitous it is that you all got to create this organization in such an intentional way, and that you got to really be thoughtful about the things you wanted to put in place, and how I kind of envious I am on behalf of some organizations that have been around for a while, that were built upon foundations that are like maybe not no longer relevant, but need to be, need to have a hard look at them. And I think it's refreshing and great that, right, you guys have this organization that you just got to but be methodical about and spend the time and energy putting in, years and years prior to like officially hiring someone and sort of launching in that regard. And again, I feel like that sort of fresh look at things would behoove organizations who shall remain nameless, but I think are numerous in the preservation world, that it would just be neat if we could be like, okay, let's anyway. And I don't know. I don't know how there's an answer to that to say, except to point to you guys and some of the work you're doing. And I will say, I think it has in particular with the pay rate and influenced, at least for us, that it brings awareness to it. And we like the last thing we would ever do is talk about an unpaid internship. And I do think that's a direct reflection on what you guys have done. So I think it is influencing other organizations across the country. And for that, you should be very proud.
Thank you.
And if there's not any other questions, I have one more. In what ways would you like academic programs to consider shifting to cultivate an inherently inclusive preservation practice? And you talked a little bit about this, but if you want to.
I'll say the one thing that I always advocate for whenever I'm speaking to a university or the school chair is the community building part of historic preservation. I mean, I took a lot of classes on Section 106, 4F, and all of these things. Um, did dozens of conditions assessments, but I was not prepared to go out into the field and work with partners.
Hmm.
I did not know how to approach them. I did not know what to say. I worked for a large national institution. I wasn't taught that. So I think that um, community building is really important, and community building with Black and Brown communities, wherever that school sits, is very important. Like just recognizing the individuals that built those campuses, recognizing the histories of those who, built the systems. Or as I shared my own experience in Savannah, Georgia, I lived in Savannah, like preservation city of the United States, and did so many tours with so many folks that were coming to visit me while I lived there for the 5 years. And we never talked about what Market Square was. What is Market Square? Why do we call it Market Square? Why is it like one of the most thriving little squares in Savannah, Georgia today? And, at that point in time, we hadn't talked about that it was like where folks would go to purchase an enslaved individual to help create the beautiful city that is Savannah, Georgia. So I just see a lot of opportunities around that. There are grassroots organizations, the type of organizations that we work with every single day. We do a lot of collaborative projects, and my go-to partners are always like the grassroots mom and pop partners, folks that maybe are ad hoc groups that don't have their nonprofits yet. So we work to empower those communities first before we will go to, let's say, like a CLG or local preservation nonprofit. They already have their capacity off the ground. Capacity building is there, but what we want to invest in are the folks that are actually doing the work. And so I think that there's a really big opportunity for folks that work within academia to begin to think outside of, let's not just partner with this architectural firm, or let's not just partner with this group because they do really cool 3D technology. What would it look like if you actually partnered and did a collaborative class with a community that really needed it, or a history that wasn't told yet, or a site that wasn't identified yet, or a project that had been overlooked by your CLG and your SHPO. Like that is so meaningful and that's powerful. And that's something that your students are going to take with them in 20 years to come. We have so many fellows that are going through programs today, and I know that they're not getting this in their educational system. Like my staff knows, and they're on here right now. My staff knows that I make them pick up the phone and call people. You need to pick up the phone and call people and learn how to do that, or learn how to go out and do in-person outreach. And yes, it is scary and maybe you don't know what to say, but we're going to practice and you're going to get it right by like the 10th time, and you're going to mess up. And that's okay because we're in a space where we all mess up. And that's part of their own cultivation. But especially with younger staff members and younger scholars, I see that more and more too, is even that comfortability of working with community. And if you work in community-led preservation, as I do, that skill set has to be there. Thankfully, a lot of times culturally it's inherent for us, but not always, so we're gonna invest a little bit more in that person and get them out of their comfort zone. But that definitely comes, I think, the biggest gap that I see is when somebody is first going through their schooling. And, I remember we used to throw around the term charrette. Like
Mhm.
it was something so, oh my gosh, ULI is going to come in. We're going to do a
Right.
charrette. There's a charrette that's going to happen in Savannah, Georgia. Oh, we're going to drive to Atlanta and be part of the charrette. I was doing a partner project with a city here in Texas that I won't say, but they were like, oh my gosh, ULI is going to come in, and they're like the planning office and the preservation office were like, oh, they're going to come in and do a charrette. And I'm like, we are creating these barriers, people. Why are we calling this thing a charrette? Like this is so silly. But things like that, like don't a charrette doesn't have to be a charrette. It can just be like a community stakeholder meeting, you
Right.
know.
Oh, it's so great to hear you say that. I'm doing a Maymester course this summer here in the San Luis Valley. And part of it is we're doing a community meeting in a tiny town of Swatch of 470 people with elementary school kids, because it's in a playground and they built an adobe wall. And we're going to look at that and talk about some use ideas or whatever. And I thought, okay, what's a non-threatening group that my students and I'm going to have them. And I got this from our last conversation with Andrea Roberts, who talked a lot about in her classes not having it so polished and all prepared and ta-da, class, here's our meeting. I'm going to have them help me put it together and help me formulate how we run it and how we engage with a bunch of first graders and their teachers on anyway. So I think that sort of skill set building is super important. And I think it's doable. And there's so many projects, I'm sure, in proximity to other universities that are dying to have the help and support of a group of students, led by someone that can sort of guide it a little bit. Um, so it's
I
nice.
love that project, by the way. I want to keep up with it, Blair.
Yes.
Um, it reminds me of a lot of the work that we do and with our scholars. They help to create or cultivate what they're going to work on
Mm.
in the summertime. So it's not always laid out perfectly. Sometimes um, I call them passion projects. Like they can do something that's outside of their own skill set, but that they want to learn. Like one of our fellows, our equity fellow, she had an associate's degree in GIS and wanted a refresher. And so as a part of it, we carved out time in part of her time period to be able to work with getting our GIS person and create a GIS map of her equity work that she was doing. And then two, we just wrote a grant application. And I have this dream where I want to go in and work with a community, work with multi-generational elders and youngers, and they write like the history of their barrio together, and then it becomes a musical. So very much like that. Like it doesn't have to be primed and polished
Right.
always in the beginning. And in fact, I agree with Andrea on that, and that like the most comfortable spaces are the spaces, at least for me, that aren't always so polished,
Yeah. Well,
and
because it
also the
allows.
real world, right?
Right. And it allows for some growth and allows the way you're approaching it for some ownership for them in the projects because they helped create it. So it isn't just like a task. It's that I love the term passion project because they got to be part of the building of it. And there's certainly enough room because there's enough, I mean, gosh, a musical. Sky's the limit with the things we can do and the different approaches. Well, I appreciate you taking time to chat with us. And I don't know if anybody has any other questions. Lauren
Anybody want to hop on?
she
Say
wanted to know
hello?
about the picture where that was taken, the group of the one you showed of the full LHCs, the group of you all.
Oh yeah, let
It was
me
like an
pull that back up.
underpass with
The
Yes,
murals.
murals.
Hmm.
that was at our last conference. It
Yeah.
was in Chicano Park right there. So that's Chicano Park in San Diego.
Okay.
Chicano Park is a site of resistance. if you can see the where the murals are painted, that's under an underpass of a highway. And in the 60s, this historic barrio, this historic Mexican Chicano, Chicanx community was promised a park. And they were not given a park by the city. And so instead, they were going to put a patrol office in this very park where it was going to be their park. So the community within this community, they all came together and had multi-days of resistance. It is like one of the birthplaces of the Chicanx civil rights movement. And they were our partner for this conference that year. And not only that, it's also the very first site designated for its murals as a National Historic Landmark. And this was part of Ken Salazar's work back in 2014. So it was part of that group that was part of the diversity initiative. So as a preservation geek, I also just think it's really cool that it's an NHL for murals. We're seeing that more often, but this was the first one.
Neat.
Thank you.
And then the piece I
Wonderful.
didn't get to, and I don't want to take a bunch more time, but I know I'm a recipient of the newsletter, and I can send to the folks on here who I know, and I think the group that a link to the mailing list and a way to join your mailing list because it's wonderful. And you guys just made an announcement today about your Endangered Latinx Landmarks program, which I'm really excited about. But it's such a great newsletter. So I'll forward the newsletter I have. And so folks at the bottom, I think, is where you can say if you want to be a recipient
Mhm.
of it or on your guys' website. I'm sure there's
Yeah.
a way there to sign up for the newsletter, but it's exciting.
Mhm. Thank you. And if you're a student that's on the meeting today or watching this, please sign up because the other thing that we do as part of our professional development is that we will post um, like jobs from SHPOs, Getty, Smithsonian, like people are always wanting us to post these job positions or fellowship positions that are opportunities for you. So we have this one, it's like a little light bite of opportunities that are on the newsletter. And then there's another one called Líderes where it only is like jobs. So back in the day, it kind of reminded me of like the preservation directory, you know, when I was like looking for it was where it's a really good listserv that you want to be a part of, like that one to help look for a fellowship or a job. And then it's also a way that you can continue being in contact with us. And I will share like a big plug for today is the very first day of our Endangered Latinx Landmarks launch. It's today. So excited.
Yeah.
It's our new program, as Blair just said, and we are going to be looking throughout the country for Latinx sites that are threatened or endangered, and they can be either historically significant or culturally significant. We look at historic preservation very different, and as long as there is a community value to it, we want to know about it. So please keep your eyes out for that. We also just launched our very first grant program. It's the first Latinx Historic Preservation Grant Program in the country. And we're gifting $600,000 to projects throughout the country, and those will be announced next month. So you will see that in our newsletter as well. And we've got a few other major things coming. And next year, our next conference, and we hope to see you there, is going to be in Chicago. And we're going to be focused on Midwest work, folks that are doing incredible work in the Midwest, and a lot of like the Afro Caribbean diaspora. It's going to be really fun and really exciting. There are 2.5 days. And again, it's just like a big community fest where people come together and get to share all of the great work that community is doing on the ground, and we get to uplift them and showcase our work. And Blair, we saw you in Colorado. We invite our practitioners to come and listen and learn, or learn how you can support Latinx preservation throughout the country. So more to come on that, but I will say that it's, I think, one of the best preservation conferences in the nation, but that's just my own thoughts.
Bet
I
it
think
is.
there's truth to what you say. It was a really fun gathering. Um, all right. Well, I want to thank everybody for your time and really appreciate, Selah, your spending the time with us and sharing your story and all the great work you're doing, and keep it up. And we look forward to following you. And on behalf of Nick P's outreach, Thank you guys. And we will have one more in this series and another conversation, and I will be sending information out to like the heads of all the programs. So you'll hear about that, as well as links to this and to the first conversation we had. And with that, I thank everybody and hope you guys all have
Thank you
a
so
great rest
much.
of your afternoon, wherever you may be.
Thank you. And thank
Thank
you,
you
Nikki.
very much.
We
Yeah.
Thank
appreciate
you.
this and always look forward to partner however we can again.
Awesome.